Hey, my name is Seb, and welcome to the Slenderman Creepypasta. These are, by the way, multiple creepypastas, but they're quite short, so I'm just gonna read them. Der Großmann. There are woodcuts dated back to the 16th century in Germany, featuring a tall, disfigured man with only white spears where his eyes should be. They called him Der Großmann, which means the tall man. He was a fairy who lived in the Black Forest. Bad children who crept into the woods at night would be chased by the Slender Man, and he wouldn't leave them alone until he caught them. But the child told the parents what he or she had done. Even then, there's a chilling account from an old journal dating around 1702. Translated from German, some words may be inaccurate.
My child, my lass, he is gone, taken from his bed. The only thing that we found was a scrap of black clothing. It felt like cotton, but it is softer, thicker. Lars came into my bedroom yesterday, screaming at the top of his lungs that the angel is outside. I asked him what he was talking about, and he told me some nonsense fairy story about Der Großmann. He said he went into the groves by our village and found one of my cows dead, hanging from a tree. I thought nothing at first, but now he is gone. We must find Lars, and my family must leave before we are killed. I'm sorry, my son. I should have listened. May God forgive me.
There's more evidence of the Slender Man, but this is one of the oldest translatable accounts. Götterdämmerung. Berlin, Germany, April 30th, 1945. Fate has taken its course. Adolf Hitler, Chancellor of Germany, allowed the tears to fall freely from his face. His wife, Eva Braun Hitler, lay beside him, the cyanide-induced seizures finally subsiding. He did not cry for her, though he felt her absence profoundly. No, Hitler cried for the death of Germany, the total devastation that had been visited on his country and his people. As if on cue, the world shuddered as more Slavic shells pounded the lands he had ruled absolutely for over 12 years. Above, the men and women of his country were being slaughtered and brutalized. The thought of his capital and its people under the thrall of the Marxist Untermenschen was horrific, and yet now it seemed inevitable. If only Great Britain had seen the value in alliance. If only his generals had led better against the Soviets. If only. Hitler's hand shook so violently at his thought that he dropped the cyanide capsule and handgun. His body was deteriorating. The disease he had carried with him since his early years was finally winning out. The Chancellor's mind wandered then, his thoughts going to his past in Vienna, his meager existence, the sights and sounds, the smell in the newspapers, the children in the streets. The eyes missing, black sockets staring at him. As if stumbling over something in a dark room, a memory startled him out of his reflection, horrified at the macabre, unnatural image burning into his consciousness. He shook himself back to the present. He was shaking all over now, his body moist in sweat. His wife's body was still warm. The Soviets seemed to be dropping everything they could over his head. The dull thumps and crashes never ceasing for a moment. The Walter PPK was cradled in his lap, the brass cyanide capsule close by. Fate has taken its course, stilling his battered nerves. Hitler grasps the items into each hand, taking several calming breaths in preparation. He looked around the bunker that would be his tomb. In a shadowed corner stood him. He wore a deep black suit, his head cocked to the side, though Hitler could not discern the creature's facial features. He knew there would be none. This was Der Großmann, a name Hitler knew, and yet could not remember from where or when. Der Großmann did not move, his unnaturally elongated body swaying like the branches of a tree. The creature reached fully to the ceiling of the bunker, yet Hitler knew the creature could become much taller, though the being did not have any shape or contours to its head. The Chancellor recognized it was looking at him. The shelling above seemed to muffle, and the air in the room began to thicken, and Hitler knew the creature was going to speak.
You were not to see me as I observed you ending your life.
The monster's voice was like three beings speaking in unison, a sultry female, a young child, and an elderly man. The elderly man held primacy of the three at the moment. Hitler knew the creature could change the primary voice to express itself in the place of facial features. Hitler sat frozen, his eyes wide. He tried to speak, but his mouth was dry and his mind was blank. Tremors sat upon his hands again. Yet this time he held on to the cyanide and handgun. The noise outside seemed to cease, and the only noise the Führer could perceive was his shuddering breath. Memories, images from nightmares and thoughts he had suppressed flooded his mind. Though the scenes and the events were all different, always were there the black sockets of children, and always the Grossmann was present. Places from Hitler's past seemed to be retold in his mind's eyes. The creature was there at the putsch, was at his inauguration in '33, from Sudetenland to Paris. It had been there, watching. The monster in the corner spoke again. This time the voice was led by the woman.
You're remembering now. This was unexpected.
The Führer was finally able to recapture his voice.
What do you mean?
You have been declared a failure, like Hess, Göring, and Himmler. That you can see and speak to me now means things have perhaps changed.
The voices seemed to cause pain to Hitler, yet he felt his ire rising at the mention of the three men.
They've all abandoned me, abandoned Germany at her most dire situation. They would sell us to the United States, the Slavs and the filthy Jews. They...
Failures. I've been at your side the entire time. I'm aware of these failures.
Hitler fell silent, his eyes falling on the handgun and cyanide.
They failed me. Germany failed me. The Untermenschen will destroy everything that my people strove to build. It is all over.
The ashen male voice returned.
You're a pathetic man, ruler of a dying empire. Your hubris brought things to where they are now.
The Führer started, his ears not used to hearing such naked accusations and criticism.
You presume.
The air suddenly tasted of metal and the light seemed to dim. The child's voice took primacy, and Hitler felt true fear weigh down his shoulders.
I do not presume, manling. Your defeat was known well before. You will watch your tone and show deference, Bunkerführer.
Hitler did not breathe, did not move, as he watched der Grossmann lift his arms towards him. Though he stood in a corner several feet away, the hands easily reached the Chancellor's bed. Hitler did not resist, did not flinch, as the hands grasped the cyanide capsule and handgun, and pulled them out of his shaking grasp. The Führer watched as the two items seemed to melt into the miasma that now enveloped the corner. After a moment, the air seemed to return. The darkness formed back into the Grossmann's shape, and the voice of the woman was loudest of the three.
This was not an expected outcome, Adolf Hitler. It is a welcome surprise, both to myself and my master. You have fulfilled the prophecy. You are indeed the Messiah.
Schlankwald. They say that monsters come only at night, that light will drive them away. But not all creatures follow this rule. Safety not certain during the day. He hides on the frinks of your vision. Brief glimpses of the distorted. He slithers and wriggles behind your eyes, reaching for you, limbs contorted. Before you know it, your children are taken. Now it comes down to you. His breath is oppressive, his presence acidus. He feels pity and you. Suddenly, trapped in his grasp so tight, you struggle to break yourself free. He laughs and he gurgles and he screeches with glee. He turns your hand for you to see. Your children are crying, though their eyes are removed. They collapse, still and silent, his arms and legs bent pulling you closer. The man's eyes dark and violent. He strikes and he cuts, your skin flay open. Your soul too weak to resist. This should not have happened, if only you had listened. Never go into his forest. The blank face. After waking up with a jolt, the girl laid in bed a few seconds longer, reaching over to switch on her bedside lamp. She tried to remember exactly what had stolen her sweet slumber away. When she couldn't, the brunette swung her leg over to the side of the bed and heaved herself up. Checking the time on her phone, she snorted when she saw it was midnight, the witching hour. Knowing sleep would only await her, she left her bathroom for the kitchen, a good cup of coffee on her mind. As she passed by her front door, a chill spread like a liquid fire down her spine. It's only winter, she told herself, focusing again on the coffee plan. Measuring out scoops, water, and preparing her cup kept her occupied, but as the dark liquid boiled, she had nothing left to keep her mind from wandering off. The chill returned, and she couldn't help but glance behind her to the front door. It stood there innocently enough, just like always. That bolt was still in place, and she could see nothing amiss with it. Turning back to her coffee, she did her best to forget about the feeling. With her cup in hand, she started back towards her bedroom. As she walked by the front door, she decided a quick glance out the peephole would help her calm her restless mind. The chill worsened with each step she took towards the door and further away from the safety and warmth of her blankets. She pressed her empty hand against the cold, metal door and took a deep breath before lending her eye to the peephole. At first she could only see an inky blackness and somehow seemed to swirl in itself. When she blinked in surprise, the void melted away. She wished it hadn't. In its place, there stood what she could only guess was once a man. Limbs were long and inhumanly awkward, with bulky joints branching off into several arms. Not unlike the branches of a tree, the creature was draped in a black suit, somehow making the thing more nightmarish to her. The icing on the proverbial cake, however, was what passed as a hellish thing's face. It was as though her mind blurred the ghastly visage to spare itself further shock and horror. She shoved her face away from the door, with her hand still pressed against it. The scalding mug of coffee fell, the liquid burning her bare legs as she fell backwards and tried to crawl away from the door. She knew, somehow, that her mind hadn't been playing tricks on her. As she crab-walked away from the door, she watched as tendrils as black as the void she first saw snakes around through the cracks. The girl was trapped between the instinct to flee and the gut feeling to not turn her back on the door. When the door jolted, the urge to flee overcame her, and she slipped in the burning liquid as she tried to make it back to her room. She knew deep down that she was trapping herself in a corner, but she had to get away from the door. The girl was halfway down the hallway when she heard the previously locked door creak open. She screamed and slipped into a wall, cracking her chin on it and stunning her. After that, there was only blackness. Nicole? A warm male voice snapped the woman out of her trance. As she turned around, she was met by one of her sister's doctors. She nodded, not sure if she should say anything, or even if she could find her voice if she did have something to say. That morning, she had gotten an urgent phone call from the hospital, saying that her sister, Lindsay, was there. Before they had even let her see her, the doctor had pulled her off the side and then insisted they talk to her about what might have happened. Phrases like self-inflicted and assault had been thrown around, and Nicole felt her mind reel. She still hadn't fully understood what they had been saying until she saw Lindsay with her own eyes. Her little sister had a bandage wrapped around her head, covering both her ears as well as her eyes. They said it was to keep her now deadened eyes from drying out and to try to keep infections out of the wounds Lindsay had to make to her ears. The doctor had guessed that either she or someone else had jammed a pencil into them to keep her off balance or to deafen herself against something. There was a mix of first and secondary burns on her hands, legs and feet from what was assumed to be the coffee her neighbors found spilled all over the entry to her apartment. As Nicole walked into her sister's hospital room for the first time, she thought she had spied the silhouette of a man in the window. That, she knew, was impossible. Her sister's room was on the third story of the hospital. It was a tall man, wearing a black suit, with a blank face. And then there's the slender Cometh, the tall man, and tall, thin, and faceless. But that would just be too long for this one video. So I just say... And don't forget, we'll meet each other. I'll see you tomorrow.